Sometimes it just hits you out of nowhere, a song, a scent, a memory, and suddenly you're right back in a moment you thought you'd forgotten. You feel it in your chest, like a gentle pull toward a version of yourself that feels both close and impossibly far away. The laughter, the freedom, the certainty you used to have. It all feels clearer in memory than in the present. If you've ever wondered why looking back can hurt more than it heals, or why nostalgia feels so heavy even when it's wrapped in warmth, you're not alone. This session is about understanding that feeling, why we miss who we used to be, and what that longing is really trying to tell us. Before we dive in, take a second to like the video, subscribe if you haven't yet, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Because no matter where you are, we've all looked back at some point. Not just to remember, but to feel closer to ourselves again. The echo of who you were. There's a strange kind of silence that follows you when life starts to move faster than you can process. One day you realize that the person you've become doesn't quite sound like the person you used to be. Not in your voice, not in your thoughts, not in the way you see the world. Maybe you were more spontaneous once, or more open. Maybe you laughed louder, or cared less about what others thought. And when that old version of you flickers in your memory, it doesn't just feel like a memory. It feels like someone you've lost. Nostalgia isn't just missing a moment. It's missing a self. The version of you who didn't yet know what would go wrong, who didn't carry the quiet weight of regret, who believed that time would move slower and that happiness would linger longer. Psychologists say nostalgia can serve as emotional grounding. It reconnects us to identity, to meaning, to warmth. But what happens when it also reminds us how far we've drifted? You start to chase fragments, playlists you used to love, old photos that freeze time, conversations from years ago that still echo in your head. You scroll through memories the way people scroll through timelines, hoping to feel something real. But the truth is, nostalgia doesn't return us to the past. It only sharpens our awareness of the present, and the distance between then and now. It's a paradox. We long for a version of ourselves that only exists in hindsight. The mind edits, polishes, softens. You forget how uncertain you were, how lost you sometimes felt. You remember only the warmth, never the cold. Nostalgia filters pain through beauty, and beauty through distance. It's both the ache and the comfort. That's why it hurts so deeply, because it gives you something to hold, but only for a second. And maybe that's why you feel it most when life slows down, late at night, or when you pass a familiar street, or when the world feels quieter than it used to. Nostalgia is your mind whispering, "You've changed." But hidden beneath that whisper is something softer, something human, a reminder that you've lived. You've felt deeply enough to miss something that no longer exists. The danger is when nostalgia becomes comparison, when you measure your current self against an idealized memory. The younger you didn't have what you have now, the lessons, the strength, the quiet understanding of what truly matters. But you also didn't carry this weight. That's what makes nostalgia so powerful. It's not just memory, it's identity. It's the collision of who you were and who you've become. And so maybe the goal isn't to go back. Maybe it's to listen, to recognize that nostalgia is your past self calling out, not to pull you backward, but to remind you of what's still inside you. The spontaneity, the hope, the ease, they don't disappear. They just get buried under responsibility, under fear, under time. But they're still there, waiting to be remembered, not relived. The truth is, you don't miss the past. You miss the you who existed there. The one who believed things were simpler because they hadn't yet been complicated. The one who saw the world through curiosity instead of caution. And the moment you understand that, nostalgia stops being a wound. It becomes a bridge between memory and growth, between who you were and who you're still becoming. And maybe that's what this whole journey is about. Not erasing the past or escaping it, but learning how to carry it with you without letting it weigh you down. Because somewhere inside the ache of nostalgia, there's still a heartbeat that sounds a lot like yours. The illusion of the better past. There's a quiet trick that the mind plays when we look backward. It paints everything in golden light. The places that once bored you now feel magical. The people who frustrated you seem kinder. And the days that once felt endless now feel too short. It's the illusion of the better past. But the past wasn't perfect. It was simply yours. And that's what makes it sacred. When you think about who you used to be, you don't remember every detail. Your brain isn't built that way. It's selective. It remembers emotion over fact, meaning over chronology. So, when nostalgia strikes, it's not replaying reality. It's replaying feeling. You're not reliving the day itself, but how that day made you feel. The warmth, the laughter, the sense of belonging. Those are what survive in memory. Everything else, the confusion, the anxiety, the quiet loneliness, fades away. That's how the illusion begins. Think about a time you miss deeply. Maybe high school, university, or a summer where everything felt infinite. You remember sitting with friends under a soft sky, the air thick with the sound of music, the smell of something familiar. It feels like a world that made sense. But what you forget are the moments in between, the times you felt uncertain about your future, insecure about yourself, or desperate to escape that very same place. Nostalgia turns survival into beauty. It hides the edges and amplifies the glow. It's comforting, but also dangerous. Because when you believe that the past was better, you stop fully living in the present. You start chasing echoes, trying to recreate feelings that were never meant to repeat in the same way. You go back to old songs, old cities, old conversations, hoping they'll give you what they once did. But they can't, because you've changed. You've grown, evolved, shifted. The same sunlight falls differently on you now. And that realization that the past can't be re-entered is what gives nostalgia its ache. It's not just missing something external. It's missing the state of being you had back then. The emotional simplicity, the purity of experience before life layered itself with responsibility and expectation. When you were younger, you didn't know you were living through the good old days. You just lived. You didn't analyze joy, you inhabited it. That's what nostalgia truly mourns. The loss of unself-conscious presence. But the past isn't better simply because it's gone. It feels better because it's safe now. It can't hurt you anymore. The pain has already been processed, softened, reinterpreted. You survived it, and in surviving it, you gave it meaning. That's what memory does. It rewrites chaos into narrative. It turns confusion into wisdom, heartbreak into lesson, uncertainty into growth. So when you look back and think, things were simpler then, what you're really feeling is your own resilience. You made it through, and now you can finally see the beauty in what once overwhelmed you. Still, it's hard not to compare, especially in an age where every day you're reminded of how much you're missing. You see other people's memories on screens, perfectly curated versions of joy, and suddenly your own present feels pale in comparison. That's when nostalgia deepens into longing, not for the past itself, but for meaning. You want to feel connected again, to yourself, to others, to something real, because nostalgia, at its core, is proof of love. You don't miss moments that meant nothing. You miss the ones that shaped you. It's easy to romanticize old versions of yourself, to believe that the person you were had it more together or felt things more deeply. But that's the illusion again. That version of you didn't have the clarity you have now. They didn't know what was coming. or how strong they would have to become. You are the proof of their resilience. The life you live now is the continuation of their story, not a lesser chapter. So, maybe the question isn't, why do we miss who we were? But why do we struggle to love who we are? Because nostalgia isn't really about time. It's about acceptance. The moment you stop idealizing your past self and start embracing your present one, nostalgia softens. It doesn't disappear. It transforms. It becomes gratitude. Gratitude for the people you met, the lessons you learned, the versions of you that helped you survive. And maybe that's the quiet truth hidden underneath the ache. The past isn't a place to return to. It's a place to honor, a museum of your becoming. Every moment you miss was once a version of you trying their best. You don't have to go back to them. You just have to thank them and keep going. Because nostalgia, as beautiful as it is, only hurts when you mistake it for a door. It's not a way back. It's a window, a glimpse into everything that made you, everything that brought you here, everything that still lives inside you, waiting to be remembered in a new way. Becoming whole again. At some point, the ache of nostalgia begins to shift from missing the past to questioning yourself. You start wondering, why can't I feel that way anymore? Why can't life feel as full, as bright as it did back then? It's not just the world that's changed, it's you. The way you perceive time, the way you process joy, the way you measure meaning. When we were younger, we experienced life in fragments of raw sensation, sound, color, emotion. We lived inside of moments instead of watching them from the outside. But as we grow older, something subtle happens. Awareness expands, and with it, so does distance. You become an observer of your own life, narrating it, analyzing it, comparing it. Nostalgia begins when we start living more in reflection than in experience. You remember the smell of rain on a summer evening, the buzz of laughter with friends, the texture of your childhood room, not because the world was inherently better, but because you were fully there. You hadn't yet built the layers of self-consciousness that separate perception from presence. Every sound and light entered you without judgment. Now, you see everything through filters, the awareness of time running out, the anxiety of potential loss, the constant comparison of how it should feel versus how it does. And that's why nostalgia hurts. Not because the past was perfect, but because you can't unknow what you now know. Innocence, once lost, cannot be refelt in the same way. And yet, that doesn't mean life can't be meaningful again. It just means that the way you experience meaning has evolved. The warmth you chase from your memories isn't gone. It's just hidden behind the noise of adulthood, the responsibilities, the distractions, the quiet fear that maybe you've already lived your best days. But that fear isn't truth. It's fatigue. It's the result of a mind that's been running for too long without resting in the present. When you stop, when you breathe, when you let yourself just be for a moment, you start to see that beauty is still here. Subtle, quieter, but real. The same golden light that touched your younger self still touches you now. The difference is that back then, you let it in. And maybe that's what healing from nostalgia really looks like. Not trying to recreate the past, but learning to receive the present in the same open-hearted way you once did. You can't go back to being who you were, but you can reconnect with the parts of you that made that person feel alive. The curiosity, the wonder, the willingness to feel deeply even when it hurt. These qualities aren't bound to a specific time in your life. They're capacities that live within you, waiting to be reawakened. We often think nostalgia means longing for a lost version of ourselves. the one who laughed more freely, who dreamed bigger, who believed in the world. But what if that version never left? What if they're still here, beneath the surface, buried under years of noise and expectation? When you start listening carefully, you can still hear their voice, faint but familiar, calling you to slow down, to remember what mattered before everything got so complicated. Maybe you don't actually miss the past. Maybe you miss the way you felt in it, grounded, open, unguarded. You miss believing that moments could be enough, that you didn't have to prove your worth through productivity, that you didn't need constant validation to feel whole. Nostalgia, then, is the soul's reminder of what real presence feels like. It whispers, "Come back." Not to who you were, but to who you are beneath everything you've built to survive. And yes, that process can hurt, because to reconnect with yourself means letting go of illusions. The illusion that life was simpler, that people were kinder, that you were better. It means facing the truth that what you long for is not the past, but the permission to slow down, the permission to exist without constantly needing to improve, to feel without needing to label, to simply be. When you start to see nostalgia this way, it stops being a wound and becomes a teacher. It teaches you to honor what was real, to extract meaning without living in mourning. The moments you remember most vividly, the laughter, the heartbreak, the music, the sky at sunset, they aren't there to trap you in sadness. They're there to remind you of your capacity for depth. The fact that you can miss so deeply is proof that you felt deeply. And that capacity is still yours. It didn't vanish with time. It just got buried under busyness, under fear, under the quiet resignation that adulthood demands. But you can bring it back, not by trying to relive the past, but by learning to look at the present the same way you used to look at the world when it was all new. You can find nostalgia within the moment, not behind it. The way sunlight hits the wall in the afternoon. The way laughter sounds when it comes unexpectedly. The way your heart still softens when you hear an old song. Nostalgia doesn't have to be something that keeps you reaching backward. It can be something that roots you deeper in now. The truth is, the past never truly leaves you. Every version of yourself still lives inside you. Every stage, every season, every transformation. The child who dreamed, the teenager who hoped, the young adult who tried and failed and kept going, they're all still here, standing quietly in your chest. You don't miss them because they're gone. You miss them because you've stopped visiting them. You've stopped speaking kindly to them. But you can go back, not in time, but in compassion. You can thank them for carrying you here. You can tell them that their story still matters. And when you do that, when you finally see your past not as something lost, but as something alive, the ache starts to ease. The longing turns into appreciation. The sadness becomes softness. You stop asking, "Why can't I go back?" and start whispering, "Thank you for getting me here." That's the hidden peace beneath nostalgia. The understanding that you were never meant to stay in any one version of yourself forever. You're meant to grow, to shed, to become. And every time you look back and feel that ache, it's not a sign that something's wrong. It's a sign that something inside you remembers how to feel, that your heart still recognizes beauty, even in its absence. So, the next time nostalgia catches you off guard, when an old photo stings or a song stops you mid-breath, don't turn away. Sit with it. Let it wash through you. Because within that ache is the deepest form of love. Love for who you were, love for how far you've come, and love for the quiet, imperfect, still becoming person you are now. You don't miss the past. You miss the part of yourself that felt safe enough to feel everything fully. And maybe the real journey isn't about getting back there. It's about creating a life now that feels just as alive, just as honest, just as deeply you. Maybe that's what nostalgia was trying to tell you all along. Not that you lost something, but that you were always meant to remember how it felt to be alive. The memories you hold aren't places you need to return to. They're proof that you once touched something real, and you can still touch it again, right here, right now. That warmth, that quiet ache in your chest. It's not sadness, it's aliveness. It's your reminder that you still care. So as you close your eyes tonight, or just sit with the silence after this, take a deep breath. Let yourself feel proud, not for being who you once were, but for becoming who you are now. You've carried so many versions of yourself here, through changes, through loss, through growth. And you're still standing. That's not something small, that's everything. If this video helped you slow down, or made you think of a version of yourself you'd like to see again, maybe take a moment, leave a comment, tell me where you're listening from. I always love reading where these thoughts find you in the world, and if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe and hit like. It helps more than you know, and it lets this little space keep growing. For now, just breathe. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're just human, remembering what it feels like to be. And the next time that familiar wave of nostalgia hits you, maybe it won't hurt quite as much. Maybe it'll just feel like a quiet hello from who you used to be. And a gentle reminder that you're still becoming someone beautiful. Good night, and I'll see you in the next one.